Trump's mass deportation operations begin this week with ICE targeting 11 million undocumented workers across America. This will cause catastrophic collapse in 5 specific industries dependent on immigrant labor. These industries cannot function without the workforce being removed. Production will halt, supply chains will break, prices will surge, companies will fail. The economic impact will be severe and immediate. 5 industries face existential crisis as their labor force disappears. Understanding which industries collapse helps investors avoid devastating losses and position for opportunities in alternatives. This is not political commentary. This is economic analysis of labor market disruption and supply chain destruction. Let me explain exactly how deportations destroy specific industries, which 5 face collapse, and what this means for investments and economy. When major portion of workforce disappears suddenly, industries cannot adjust quickly enough to survive. These 5 industries have highest concentration of immigrant workers and will suffer most severe damage. The deportation scale is unprecedented. 11 million undocumented workers represent approximately 7% of total U.S. workforce. But distribution is not uniform. Some industries employ very few undocumented workers. Other industries depend heavily on them. Construction industry is 25% undocumented labor. Agriculture is 50% or more in many segments. Food processing is 30%. These concentrated dependencies create vulnerability. Removing workforce at this scale means these industries cannot operate at current capacity. The replacement problem is fundamental. Industries employ undocumented workers because American citizens won't do these jobs at offered wages. Construction work in hot sun for $12 per hour, agricultural field work harvesting crops for minimum wage, meat processing in harsh conditions. American unemployment is 4%. The available workers are already employed. There are not millions of Americans waiting to take these jobs at current wages. Even doubling wages might not attract enough workers. And doubling wages means doubling prices for consumers. The industries face impossible choice between shutting down or raising prices so high that demand collapses. Industry 1 that collapses is residential construction. 25% of construction workforce is undocumented. Removing 2 million construction workers means building fewer houses and slower construction timelines. Current housing shortage of 4 million units will worsen dramatically. Construction that takes 12 months will take 18 months as crews shrink. Projects will be abandoned incomplete when contractors cannot find workers. Labor costs will surge as remaining workers demand premium wages. A house that costs $400,000 to build will cost $600,000. Housing prices will spike even higher than current levels, making affordability crisis far worse. The specific segments most impacted are framing, roofing, concrete work, and landscaping. These trades have highest concentration of immigrant workers. Framing crews are often entirely immigrant labor. Losing these workers means houses sit at foundation stage waiting months for available crews. Roofing companies will fail as they cannot complete contracts without workers. Concrete contractors will face massive backlogs. The cascade effects ripple through entire construction sector. Developers will halt new projects. Home builders will see costs explode and margins disappear. Construction stocks will crash as investors recognize the impossibility of meeting demand without workforce. Industry 2 that collapses is agriculture and food production. Farms depend on immigrant labor for planting, tending, and harvesting crops. 50% or more of agricultural workers in many regions are undocumented. Dairy farms depend on immigrant labor for milking and care. Fruit and vegetable farms require intensive manual labor for harvest. Removing this workforce means crops will rot in fields unharvested. Milk production will decline sharply. Meat processing plants will slow or shut down as workers disappear. Food prices will surge as domestic supply collapses. The harvest season is time critical. Crops must be picked when ripe or they spoil. A strawberry farm needs 100 workers for 2-week harvest window. If deportations remove 50 of those workers, half the crop rots. The farm loses revenue while consumers face strawberry shortage and price spikes. This same dynamic repeats across all labor-intensive crops. Lettuce, tomatoes, berries, all require extensive manual labor. Mechanical harvesting exists for some crops, but not others. Strawberries cannot be harvested mechanically without damage. These crops will simply not be produced at current scale without immigrant labor. The dairy industry faces particular crisis. Cows must be milked twice daily every single day. Dairy farms employ immigrant workers for this round-the-clock labor. Deportations will force farms to reduce herd size or shut down completely when workers disappear. Milk production will decline, causing shortages and price increases for milk, cheese, yogurt, and all dairy products. A gallon of milk that costs $4 might reach $8 as supply collapses. Industry 3 that collapses is food processing and meat packing. 30% of workers in meat processing plants are undocumented. These plants process beef, pork, and chicken for American consumption. The work is difficult, dangerous, and low paid. American workers avoid these jobs. Plants in rural areas depend almost entirely on immigrant labor. Deportations will force plant closures as workforce disappears. Remaining plants will operate at reduced capacity, creating meat shortages and price spikes. The meat supply chain is inflexible in short term. Cattle and hogs are raised on timelines that cannot adjust quickly. Farmers breed livestock expecting processing capacity to exist when animals reach market weight. If processing plants close, farmers have nowhere to sell their animals. They must either house and feed animals longer at great expense or dispose of animals at total loss. Meanwhile, consumers face meat shortages and price increases at grocery stores. Ground beef that costs $6 per pound might reach $12 as supply crashes. The restaurant industry will face cascading crisis as meat and produce prices surge and availability declines. Restaurants operate on thin margins. Doubling food costs while labor costs also increase from general wage inflation will make many restaurants unprofitable. Expect widespread restaurant failures, particularly in segments dependent on immigrant labor for kitchen staff. The restaurant industry itself employs high percentage of undocumented workers in kitchen and support roles. Losing these workers means restaurants cannot staff kitchens even as food costs explode. Industry 4 that collapses is hospitality, including hotels and resorts. Housekeeping, kitchen staff, groundskeeping, and maintenance at hotels depend heavily on immigrant labor. Large resort properties employ hundreds of workers in these roles. Deportations will leave hotels unable to clean rooms, maintain properties, or serve food. Occupancy will decline as service deteriorates. Hotels will raise prices attempting to attract American workers at higher wages but face difficulty filling positions. The combination of higher costs and lower occupancy will force hotel closures, particularly in markets dependent on immigrant workforce. The tourism economy in states like Florida, California, and Nevada will suffer severe damage. Tourism generates hundreds of billions in economic activity. Hotels cannot operate without housekeeping staff. Theme parks cannot function without maintenance workers and food service staff. Convention centers cannot host events without support staff. The entire tourism ecosystem will contract as essential workforce disappears. Cities dependent on tourism revenue will face budget crises as hotel tax revenue collapses. Industry 5 that collapses is landscaping and grounds maintenance. Commercial properties, residential communities, golf courses, and parks depend on landscaping services staffed predominantly by immigrant workers. Property management companies will face crisis as landscaping contractors fail or raise prices dramatically. Maintaining appearance of commercial properties and residential developments requires regular service. When workforce disappears, properties will deteriorate. Golf courses will close as they cannot maintain courses without worker crews. Cities will face parks and public spaces becoming overgrown as maintenance capacity collapses. The housing market will see additional impact as landscaping costs surge. Homeowners associations will raise dues to cover tripled landscaping costs or let common areas deteriorate. Both outcomes harm property values. A home and maintained community with landscaping holds value. Same home and deteriorating community with overgrown common areas loses value rapidly. Homeowners will face difficult choices between paying much higher maintenance costs or accepting property value declines. The investment implications are clear. Avoid stocks dependent on these collapsing industries. Homebuilder stocks will crash as construction labor costs surge and housing prices become unaffordable, killing demand. Agriculture companies will see production collapse and margin compression from labor costs. Food processing companies dependent on immigrant labor will face plant closures and supply disruptions. Hotel chains will suffer occupancy declines and margin compression. Landscaping and facilities management companies will fail or see dramatic profit declines. The alternative investments to consider are companies benefiting from supply disruptions. Food imports will surge as domestic production collapses. International food distributors will profit. Automation and robotics companies will see demand increase as industries desperately seek labor alternatives. Construction materials suppliers to Canada and Mexico will benefit as home building shifts to countries with available labor. Prepared meal companies using preserved ingredients will gain share as fresh food prices surge, making cooking from scratch expensive. The inflation impact will be severe and persistent. Food price increases of 30 to 50% are possible as agricultural production and processing capacity decline. Housing costs will surge further as construction slows. Restaurant prices will increase dramatically. Hotels will raise rates. The Federal Reserve will face impossible situation of inflation surging from supply destruction while economy weakens from industries collapsing. Traditional inflation fighting through interest rate increases will worsen the problem by further damaging construction and other interest rate sensitive sectors already reeling from labor shortages. The political response will likely involve pressures to reverse or modify deportation policies as industries collapse and prices surge, but the damage will already be done. Deported workers cannot instantly return. Industries cannot rebuild workforce quickly. Supply chains once broken take extended time to repair. Even if policies change within months, the economic disruption will persist for years. Investors must position now for the disruptive impacts rather than hoping for policy reversal to prevent collapse. Trump's mass deportations removing 11 million workers will cause collapse in 5 industries unable to function without immigrant labor. Residential construction losing 25% of workforce will see building activity decline sharply with costs and housing prices surging. Agriculture and food production losing 50% of labor in many segments will see crops rotting unharvested and production declining, causing food shortages and price spikes. Food processing and meat packing, losing 30% of workforce, will see plant closures creating meat shortages and price surges. Hospitality industry hotels losing housekeeping and support staff will see service deteriorate and properties close. Landscaping and grounds maintenance losing immigrant workforce will see properties deteriorate and costs triple. These 5 industries face existential crisis. Avoid investments in these collapsing sectors. Position for opportunities in food imports, automation, and alternatives benefiting from supply disruptions. The economic impact will be severe and immediate.